This is an ACU Centre for Liturgy podcast. Speaking of liturgy. After a huge disruption, Christian communities at last are returning in person to communal worship and recovering their voice. Speaking of liturgy, Dr Judith Kubicki, Assistant Professor Emerita of the Theology Department of Fordham University, New York, and Provincial Minister of the Felician Sisters of North America, invites us to consider how this physical experience of unity mediates the presence of Christ.
I'm happy to be here today. My topic is recovering the Assembly's voice. In these waning days of COVID-19, we are faced with the challenge of recovering the voice of our gathered assemblies. Certainly, one of the blessings of technology has been the opportunity to connect via Zoom or live streaming when the lockdown made it impossible to gather for worship in person. Now, however, we need to consider what we lose by continuing online worship and why it is important to return to in-person worship. Zoom and live streaming silenced the communal voice of our assemblies. This is not a judgment, but an acknowledgement of the limits of current technological resources. Only one voice can be heard at any one time on one computer microphone, and it is not possible to add one's voice to live streaming when participating online. A pre-Vatican II theology might not find this problematic, since the subject of the liturgy, the one who did the liturgy, was the ordained priest. The congregation generally assumed the role of observers for the most part. However, the Second Vatican Council teaches that the gathered assembly is the subject of the liturgy. The presider leads worship and prays on behalf of the assembly. But the assembly is meant to be an active participant in liturgical celebrations. Indeed, active participation was a primary goal of the liturgical reform. If that is true, it is essential that members of the gathered assembly experience themselves as active participants. Article 7 of the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy speaks of the gathered assembly as a mode of Christ's presence. The other modes include Christ's presence in the presider, the word, the bread and wine, and the other sacraments. When the assembly gathers, it is united in gestures, in celebrating or handling symbols, and in giving voice to its faith through acclamations and full-throated song. Worship is essentially a bodily activity, and perhaps there is nothing that so fully involves bodiliness as music making. The general instruction of the Roman Missal, Germ 2002, Article 47, asserts that singing the opening hymn or chant fosters an experience of unity among those who have gathered for worship. This first action of the assembly, as gathered and gathering, can provide the assembly with a sense of itself as a communal body. As symbolizing activity, the assembly singing allows it to find its identity as people of faith and assist them in negotiating connections with each other and with God. When this happens, the assembly singing enables it to experience itself as the presence of Christ. Recall Matthew 18:20, quote, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in their midst," unquote. The gathered assembly can experience itself as one and as an instance of the presence of Christ by re-engaging in a celebration of liturgical symbols that generate meaning. Through this engagement or re-engagement, the assembly is drawn into the liturgical action under the leadership of a presider. This activity enables the assembly in a direct and meaningful way to participate in the liturgical action as the presence of Christ for the world through their innate bodiliness. The experience of unity is essential in mediating the presence of Christ when the assembly gathers. Making music, specifically the act of singing as a gathered assembly, promotes this experience in a powerfully tangible way. The ability to promote and experience unity and engagement in the liturgical action is significantly reduced when it is mediated by electronic devices. For this reason, people of faith need to come together so that they are present to each other in a shared space. Rejuvenating a parish music program is part of the way of bringing people back to in-person worship. This does not mean putting on a show that people watch. It means creating a liturgical music program that invites and enables the assembly to sing. It involves carefully planning a repertoire that gives voice to the prayer and faith experience of actual people in the pews. And while there is always a place for volunteers and amateurs, a robust and meaningful music program needs a director with talent, training, and education in both liturgical music and liturgical theology. Thank you.
That was Sister Judith Kubicki with Recovering the Assembly's Voice, an exploration of how the gathered assembly physically experiences the presence of Christ in the liturgy. The ACU Centre for Liturgy, which provides pastoral formation in liturgy across Australia and beyond, is pleased to provide this podcast, Speaking of Liturgy.